Welcome back, the Star Wars Newsnet Timeline Show, episode 49. It's been like a month since we've been on talking timeline for Star Wars, and that's entirely my fault because I can't read The Fallen Star, I guess, in less than a few weeks, but life has been crazy, so it's okay. Luke, episode 49, The Fallen Star. We should have probably figured out a way to drag out one more episode to make this the 50th episode, because that just feels more climactic for the one of the biggest, most important books in the entirety of the High Republic. But here we are, 2:30 BBY today, talking about Claudia Gray's The Fallen Star. Luke, this is a massive book. Not my favorite in the High Republic, but a massive book. There are so many pivotal moments that happen in this book that you will not find in any other High Republic book, from the standpoint of, deaths of characters to intense plot moving storylines that are still being resolved as we enter into the final book that comes out just in a couple weeks from now. So excited to talk about this with you. I am revved up. I don't know if you can tell that I am just fired up because we haven't had a timeline show in so long, and I was reading this a lot, rereading it over the last couple days, going, I am so ready to talk about Star Wars books again. Here we go. Let's get on the timeline grind. 2:30 BBY, Claudia Gray. It's been a few years since this came out. Luke, how are you feeling? Are we ready for The Fallen Star?
Totally. I am also with you in a lot. I feel like we're in kind of the same vein here in life, in Star Wars too here. It's been kind of crazy. We got just a little under 3 months of our wedding planning to do. So we're getting really close to that. Work is crazy. So, and I gotta say, the timeline show drives a lot of my reading. I love reading books all the time. So the timeline show drives that, and not having a show in about a month. I've actually been out of Star Wars reading for a month-ish. So it's this being on this show right now. It's very exciting to get back into it and dive back in. I'm actually more juiced for it than I thought I would be a couple days ago. So
I feel you.
I'm ready.
I am so ready. So this one, because we've been gone, this is such a big book, I want to just do a very quick synopsis. This is what happens in the book, and we'll get into the characters and how each main character plays a role, in the story, their arc, what happens. But let's just go ahead and do a quick rundown of what happens for, I know there's people that follow along to the timeline show specifically because they don't have time to read everything. So they like to at least know, okay, what are the finer points here? And then, what happens to the characters, as they go along. So essentially we have Starlight Beacon, which is the pinnacle of hope for the galaxy in large way. This is the greatest of Chancellor Lina Soh's great works, and it pretty much is what is binding the Outer Rim and the main Republic together. This is a time of exploration. The frontier is being explored. Jedi are at the height of their power. They're seen as, almost inflappable at this point. And the Nihil threat has been believed to be nearly destroyed. We obviously know, as we're reading, that they are far from destroyed. They think that Lorna D is the Eye of the Nihil, when it's actually, Marchion Ro that is the Eye of the Nihil. Most of the Nihil forces have not been wiped out. There's these plans to, maneuver and everything. So the Fallen Star, very clearly on the cover, very quickly in this book that this station is going down. So it's going to go down. There are moments throughout the story where you're like, oh, maybe they'll save it. Maybe they will. Maybe they will save the day. But you're reading it. That catastrophe is going to happen. And it's just this slow ticking time bomb of how and when the station will collapse and who all will go down with it. And we'll talk about what the Fallen Star means when it's not even exactly Starlight Beacon necessarily that it's referring to in the title. But the story starts with Stellan Gios, the pole star and the face of the Jedi Order for the galaxy, has taken over Starlight Beacon because Avar Kriss, the former marshal, she's kind of been doing her own thing, going after Lorna D, and there's been some conflict between Avar and Stellan, two very close friends, but Stellan's now in control of Starlight Beacon. He is now the marshal. You have the other of the trio trio of firebrands. Elzar Mann is training with Orla Jareni. We talked about in, oh my goodness, what was it called? The Rising Storm, where Elzar tapped into the dark side of the Force. So now he is, kind of getting some alone time with Orla Jareni to refocus, recenter, and learn how to experience the Force in ways that don't tempt him to use the dark side, and really kind of reining himself in, but finding how he can use the best of his abilities and the best of himself to the betterment of the order, but also to the betterment of himself and gaining that self-confidence. And his whole journey in the story is one of reluctance to use the Force, reluctance to give in to the serenity that the Force can offer, and the reluctance to step into a power position. He ultimately has this big hero's journey, and then has just the sharpest fall from that journey again. So we're gonna end with him, we're starting and ending with him at these low points, and he's gonna reach this high point in the middle, but then he comes right back down, which is fascinating. We have essentially the Nihil. Marchion Ro has brought in some of his Nihil members to sabotage Starlight Beacon and to ensure that it falls apart. Now, in order to do this, of course, they, one, have to blend in, but two, they bring several creatures of the Nameless with them. I think it's 7 total, to slowly deteriorate the Jedi senses and their ability to sense the Force and to perceive threats around them. And it has a massive effect. So you have Stellan Gios, who is the pinnacle of what a Jedi is, and he is slowly crumbling to where he can barely move at points because the threat and the effect that the Nameless creatures have on the Jedi is so intense, it's so palpable. The fear is so cunning that it takes out several Jedi in the story, like Regal Cole. It takes out Orla Jareni. It takes out Nibisek. These are Jedi masters that are falling to the Nameless here. And the Jedi don't know about the Nameless really at this time. They know that there is something that the Nihil have possession of that is doing this to Jedi, but they don't know it's a creature. They kind of learn that towards the end of this book. And so essentially, we have our main characters that we're going to follow. I mentioned Stellan. I mentioned, Elzar. Orla plays a major role in the beginning half of this. We have Burryaga that is a major role in this, and Bell and their friendship, and how Burry, quote unquote, dies. We know he doesn't die, but Bell, has to reconcile with, I'm not going to believe he's dead until he's dead. But Burry has this amazing sacrifice. And of course, we have to talk about Marchion Ro being the one that's leading this charge against the Jedi. And essentially, Starlight Beacon does come down, and we'll talk about the ins and outs of what that looks like. The station splits in two. Part of the station's destroyed. Avar Kriss is able to get people off. We know Estella Maru was part of the top half of the station that was destroyed. And so the goal for the crew is, one, we have to get everyone off the station in one piece, right? And the second thing is, but can we stop the station from being destroyed? And there's different points in time where they're able to get close to that. And Stellan essentially stays on board and sacrifices himself to pilot the positional thrusters on the bottom half into the middle of the Sea of Aram to make sure that no other casualties die, because originally it was going to destroy the city, but they were able to partially get the positional thrusters online, and he sacrifices himself. Someone had to stay basically and go down with the ship, and he chose to do that. And there's just a brilliant writing from Claudia Gray for Stellan that I want to talk about when we get to more of Stellan's character development. But Elzar survives, and he's reunited with Avar at the end, and that's a really emotional scene. This is something from the comic that is played out here, but that's essentially what happens, and it ends with Marchion Ro making this announcement to the galaxy, because the galaxy is watching this unfold. It's a slow death that is unfolding, and the galaxy is watching, and he says, this is the Nihil. I am Marchion Ro. I am the leader of the Nihil. This part of the galaxy is mine. This is my part of the galaxy. No one can touch me. I am invincible. The Jedi will crumble before me. The Republic will crumble before me. The Outer Rim is the Nihil's, and I am the leader of the Nihil. No one will stand in our way. And we just finish off this entire phase in utter despair. We lose one of our great Jedi of the Order. We lose other great Jedi along with it. The trio of Avar, Elzar, and Stellan is broken up. We never even got to see the three of them together in a book, but we know how important they were, and we could talk about that as well. But Luke, that's essentially where we leave off. And I cannot wait to dive into all the different, elements of the different characters and some of the fun things that happen in this book, and also not so fun things that happen as well. Did I leave out any critical information outside of the whole main overarching story before we get into all of the characters that we love from this book, but also some of the issues that we have with it as well?
Right. I think that is what happens in The Fallen Star. We can definitely will give more explanation as to how these things happened and why they happened. But
Of course.
yeah, the station is blown up, and it hit me that it's like such a slow death. I think, like you said,
Right.
and it takes hours, almost maybe half a day, for this to really transpire. And it just reminds me of like the complete antithesis that this is to like the Death Star, where this is everything good and it dies a slow death. This is everything bad and it has the most instantaneous eruption, and everything is a foil kind of to this whole thing that I see. It's really interesting to kind of look at it that perspective. But
that's actually a really good way of putting it.
But yeah, we can get into some of the character studies and see how these
Yeah, for
characters
sure.
really affected.
Well, I want to ask you too.
overall
Well,
plot.
you said a few hours, but really it's days because the saboteurs are
Yeah,
on the ship for like 5 or
Kale,
6
Werrera,
days.
and Lael.
Like they're on the ship for a few days. So we see Stellan at the
Gosh, they
beginning
are.
just that he is feeling himself. He is great. And then slowly we just see this disturbance in the force kind of eating away at the Jedi in really sad ways, to where Stellan's a shell of the man that he was at the beginning of the book, but then he reclaims himself at the end in truly inspiring fashion. But where does this book rank for you? So we're finishing up phase one. Like, don't ignore the phase 3 books that two of us have read but haven't got to on the timeline show. So strictly in the phase 1, phase 2 realm, we have what is it, Mission to Disaster that we're going to be doing, or sorry,
That's
not
next
Mission to
for us.
Disaster. Mission Disaster. No, it's Midnight Horizon. Midnight Horizon will be next.
That okay, yeah, those are the
Yes,
two
so-
left.
Yeah, so those are the 2 left that we have. But outside of those, because we haven't got to those yet, you can mention them if you want. But where does this rank on the hierarchy of High Republic books for you to this point in the timeline?
So to make it a little easier on myself, I think of this in terms of like, where does it rank in the adult novels? We
Okay.
have 5 of those between phase 1 and 2. And even though it is 5th out of 5 for me, I still think I liked it more than I don't.
Of
It's
course.
maybe closer of a gap than the other books, and that's why it's 5th. But it's so monumental. I mean, this book alone kind of like impacts every single thing that's happening in phase 3, and like is mentioned by name. It's the focal point of the High Republic, maybe in some terms, because I was thinking about Light of the Jedi and how slow of a start that is, and how it's a creeping, like it gives you like 3 hours till impact, 2 hours till impact, and it's this kind of slow build to destruction. And this is also like, you have that creeping sense, but you don't know the time. You don't know if it's going to go down. You don't know the end result. You know that in Light of the Jedi, there's this impact that's going to happen. This book gives you a similar feel, but you, the reader, feel obfuscated and feel like you're in the dark and you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And I think that's kind of an embodiment of how the Jedi feel. They are completely disrupted by the Nameless on board. They feel lost. They don't know why they are. So
The Nameless are described as fear itself manifesting, itself.
So there's really cool things going on in this book, but I think the other 4 in the previous phases do just a little better job at almost everything else. So
it's 5th out of 5 for me as well. And I will say this: I really enjoyed this book way more this time around. I
did too.
I don't know what it was specifically.
I enjoyed it more.
I think part of it may be knowing what happens a little bit in the future, or whenever something new comes out, and you know that I fall victim to this all the time, is I get so excited for things. And a lot of people are like this. Like they get, you get so excited and worked up over what's, how it's going to be. And you set these expectations that sometimes are a little bit too out of control, and I'm trying not to do that with Trials of the Jedi coming out. It's like I'm trying to
Yeah.
temper those expectations. And I think with Fallen Star, like I set the bar maybe too high given how great, when Rising Storm came out, The Light of the Jedi came out, absolutely knocked him out of the park. I love those books. And then Fallen Star for me, I still read this, and I don't think it quite hits the bar of those two, but I really enjoyed it much more. And I think it fits more in the trilogy a little bit better. Like I think it feels like it's a little bit more of a seamless fit. Before I kind of was like, this book feels so disjointed from the other two. Now, Convergence and Cataclysm, oh my goodness, like Cataclysm is my favorite Star Wars book of all time. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to put anything above that. And then Convergence, obviously being the one that leads into it, I love that one as well. So 5 out of 5, when I consider the other 4 books in phase 1 and 2 adult novels, S tier Star Wars is not saying much. Like I put this in like a B tier or a C plus tier. Like I'm not big into this book, but I really enjoyed the second time around. So let's go ahead. Let's get into the characters. Which character would you like to start with? I know I mentioned talking about a couple, but I know that you are in particular maybe have someone you're leaning towards. So you go for it first.
I thought maybe a cool roadmap to start with. I don't know where we're going to end with, but we could start with Orla, and I think she would transition us into Elzar.
We can honestly go Elzar and Orla simultaneously in a way, because the book begins with those two in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They're tied at the hip. Elzar and Orla's training Elzar essentially, and handpicked by Stellan to kind of help him on his journey. So Orla is a way seeker. She seeks after the Force in her own way. And she's very blunt. She's very direct, but she does have a very big heart. And she's always looking for interesting ways to help people. Like in the beginning of the book, when they're trying to get the Starlight Beacon and the crew of the vessel is there to get them there, they see a Nihil attack. And something that Elzar was like, crap, we don't have any blasters. We don't have any laser cannons. We can't really help. And then Orla finds a very unique way of flooding the communication systems of the Nihil to distract them long enough for some of the ships to escape. And Elzar's like, how come I didn't think of something like that? That out of the box thinking should be natural to a Jedi, but I couldn't get there. And Orla, she's able to see those things, and she tells Stellan how it is. And they have like this really intense conversation at one point in the book. But your initial thoughts on Orla, let's take Into the Dark out of it. Let's say you haven't read Into the Dark. What would your initial takeaway be from Orla, just if you were just reading this? Because, her story, if you haven't read Into the Dark and some of the other, comics, like her story starts and ends right here.
So that one, my first time ever reading The Fallen Star, this was my introduction to Orla Jareni. And that is funny that you're saying take those other things out, because I feel like as I've had those other things added in, like I finally read Into the Dark, and I finally read the comics. I do like her a lot more. The more that I get to know her, the more I'm exposed. So, the other thing I was going to say. So I've read this book 3 times now. The third time that I did this most recently was the audiobook version, and the song that she decides to play actually gets played for you in the audiobook. And so that was I thought that was funny that they took the time to make that and they put it in the audiobook. She's kind of a ghost of a person. I mean, physically she's very pale, but her presence is very just removed, and she operates kind of on the fringes. And I mean, that's
that way seeker.
She is a way seeker. So I mean, that's kind of how she's also supposed to be operating. So she's really interesting.
What makes her and Stellan's relationship so interesting
too. Yeah, those two spark.
Because Stellan is the embodiment of the Jedi Order. Like he is Mr. Jedi Order, and she is, I am going to push against the Jedi Order. And so I wanted to read a little bit, just a quick thing about they're going back and forth. So they're sparring a little bit, where Stellan essentially, he makes a joke about how, oh, you've wasted your time as a way seeker. You should have been an investigator like this. And he makes a jab at her. And there was just a little too much truth in what he was saying. Orla couldn't really let it go. And so they have this little bit of a back and forth. And what's fascinating is she tells Stellan, she says, "Don't misunderstand me. You look good in the spotlight, Stellan, but I know you well enough to realize how uneasy you are there. You've always had to be the golden child of the Order. You've never felt free to search or to fail. You've never had the luxury to chart your own path. Is this why you're threatened by the way seekers who do?" And Stellan essentially says he's not threatened, that they're meant to follow the path the Order and the Force show us. And Claudia puts this, she says, the Order and the Force. And you notice how the Order comes before the Force there. And I thought that was just a fascinating line, because Orla shakes her head and says, "That's where we differ. You still think the Jedi Order and the Force are the same thing." And essentially, she says how she's worried that he's in danger of disappearing that spotlight, and she hopes that he finds himself someday and not who the Order have paved him out to be. But I thought that line was fascinating, that he still believes that the Jedi Order and the Force are the same, and he put the Order in front of the Force, and that kind of does give you everything you need to know about Orla and who she is and what she prioritizes, but it also gives you a really good insight into Stellan.
Yeah, I think this summed up kind of how I see myself, and maybe my like tragic flaw of my own self is like, I really seek those institutions or those routines. I really need to have them bring structure into my life, because maybe I'm not the best at making that for myself. So I really related to Stellan for him thriving under this thing that he's got going, being so deeply invested in the Order. And so I felt like Orla was talking to me when she was like,
Yeah.
"Do you know yourself really? Like, apart from the Order, like you're still a Jedi, you still have a connection to the Force. How's that going? Because it seems like you're just only invested in the Order and the fame it might bring you, the personal gain you have from that." And so I was like, man, I
Or
think
like
I'm
he's so
going,
focused on the duty that the Order has
yeah,
for him that he forgets that his first duty is to follow the Force and see where it leads and explore that for himself. It kind of reminds me of like how sometimes as parents, I'm not a parent, but like your parents will your parents try to mold their kids sometimes into the version of themselves that they want them to be. And Stellan is like the classic. He has tried to live into the mold that the Jedi Order, his parents, have set out for him, but he doesn't really understand like where to go from there. It's like growing up in like a religious household, whether whatever religion it is, and you kind of take on that religion because that's my parents' religion or that's my family's religion,
totally.
and you don't ever really discover like your faith for yourself. Like you don't find your own faith and your own version of that. And there's going to come a point in time where that is tested, where that is put tested to the limits, and you have to find it for yourself, or your whole world could crumble. And Stellan's faced with that crisis of faith, like in this book directly, when he's cut off from the Force and not able to be the person that he's been told he has to be for the Jedi Order. And that's what I loved about Stellan's journey too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, because not only do you get this little interaction that's so good between these two characters, but then throughout the rest of the book, Stellan has to like immediately come to terms with like, all right, it's happening. It's happening to me now. Like my world is crumbling, ideologically and also physically, like around me, like the Force that I draw upon. And it's just something that like I kind of use. I have a special relationship with it, have my like due respect, but like I'm this person who do, and like for that to crumble away, for it to go by the wayside, was fascinating to see how he really came all the way unraveled. He isn't sleeping. He's having horrible nightmares of things that kind of do transpire.
Right.
So for him to be able to rein it back in at the very end, not to like skip too far ahead, but he does
No,
finally
he dies.
he does finally feel like he's himself apart from the Force. He
For the
just
first
feels like
time.
he's a man. really, for the first time.
He's because he's so disconnected at that point. He has to be, which is why, and this is one of
Yeah.
my issues. Like I get that. So Stellan dies, and the future, Elzar has to take up that mantle. And so much of Elzar's future is going to be, how can I live up to be an ounce of what Stellan was for the Order? And he struggles with that. And so Stellan's death does serve as a launch point for both Avar and Elzar, discovering who they are without him, but also the best of who they can be and also what they should be doing together. So I don't want to discount all of the character development that we will see at a future point. I just want to focus just purely on where we are right now in the timeline. And something that I was frustrated with when I first read this, not knowing what was going to happen in phase 3, that somewhat continues now that I have read phase 3. A little bit lessons given the character dynamics I mentioned before, but still prevalent, is we see Stellan have that crisis of faith, rediscover who he is, but then we don't get a chance to see how that is going to impact his role in the galaxy in terms of how he's going to interact with the Order. What changes would he have brought to how he navigates the Order? How does he talk about the Force differently? How does he see himself and his role in this conflict against the Nihil and what he's supposed to be bringing to the Order? He's been wearing the mask that the Order has put on him for so long. He finally sheds free of that, but his death happens right at the end. It's kind of like a lower extreme of Ben Solo and throwing away the Kylo Ren mask and throwing away like that part of himself and then finally rediscovering who he is as Ben. And it's not that drastic of dark side, light side with Stellan, but it's more of like a self-discovery and affirmation of who he is. And I think we've all had, that's what makes Stellan so relatable. And I think you mentioned this too, is that you can see yourself in him, because how often in life have we thought we were doing something because that's what we felt like we were supposed to do and had to do. And then came a point in time where we realized, am I doing this for me or am I doing this for someone else? Like, who am I if I am not this? And we never really got to see what Stellan would do on the other side of that, because as soon as he finally has that freedom and confidence of that, he like takes himself down.
Yeah. Oh, that cuts really deep. Like, who am I if I'm not this thing? Where, a lot of us go through like, well, I graduated high school. I don't play sports anymore. So like that was kind of my whole personality. Was like I was soccer player. Soccer player is my job. Beach is my job. Right. So he was the perfect like narrative vehicle for that to drive us forward with that kind of storyline. And so for him to die, there isn't really a replacement for him. There's no one else going through this same crisis. So it's kind of sad that like we don't get more of this story, this like type of storyline, because no one else is really giving us this type of plot line. So I appreciate what it was in the book. And yeah, I really wanted to see where he would have gone and what he would have done differently, because he would have had to have responded with a complete change of stuff going forward.
And I wrote this down because it's highlighted on page like 330 in the book, and I put this down as one of my notes, and it was him saying that this is when he's taking the ship, when he's taking Starlight down, he thinks to himself, this is the first time that he's acted with no thought for the Order. It's the first thing he's ever done only as himself, because he knew it to be right. And when you think that Stellan is probably what, he's like in his early 30s at this point, probably something like that. Early mid 30s. To have the Jedi are taken at such a young age. For the first time in 30 years, he's doing something without having to think, is this best for the Order? Is this what the Order wants me to do? And instead he's saying, this is the right thing to do, and I'm doing it for myself, and I'm doing it for the people that I know I'm serving, without a thought to that. And the last like words here is he's talking about how he feels stronger than he maybe ever had in his life. And that's him acting as a man without the use of the Force. And the last, thing that he says, and it's like he says this audibly to himself, essentially, is, or he says, I know what he's talking to 4-5, the droid, as the droid's leaving. He just says, I know who I am. And that it just is so pivotal in that moment to actually know that. And for him to say that out loud is the last thing he probably, he essentially says out loud, is a great way for his character to end. If it has to end here, I think what we're both saying though is it's frustrating that we don't get to see what that would have meant if he got to experience that change later.
Yeah. Um, I gotta say, we did our interview with Kevin Scott, and he maybe even talked me off of a ledge before we even got to this point because he was talking about how Project Luminous, that team, talked about how much more impactful it would be to take him out of the story. So even Kevin Scott
Mhm.
himself, who didn't write this book, knew that like for the grand story of the High Republic, for all these like 30 books that
Mhm.
there are, like it's gonna hit harder. It's gonna be a better decision to to have him die.
And Kevin said he was gonna be around till Trials of the Jedi, like,
Yeah.
originally, like, he was gonna be
Wow.
around to this last book that we were getting, and instead, he's not even in Phase 3 at all, so, maybe the alternate cut, I would love to know the alternate cut at some point, something like that would be
That
nice,
would be fun.
but to bring this back to where we started with Orla, essentially, with Orla, what we get is she guides Stellan in a way to being who he needs to be in the most pivotal moment, the most pivotal time of his life. And obviously Stellan like answers that call and he's never been afraid of answering that call. But it's interesting we can juxtapose this, Orla dies midway through the book going
Mhm.
after the nameless. She's very much one of the people leading the charge of we have to figure out what this disturbance on the force is. And she's a guide for Elzar. And Elzar has a very different ending in this book. While Stellan knows who he is, and his last words are, I know who I am. Elzar's whole book journey is about rediscovering that confidence in who he is and what version of himself is best suited to going forward. And he feels like he finds that. There's this moment where, he's going down to the positional thrusters to regain control of Starlight Beacon. He has single-handedly kind of kept the station afloat. Like he lifted the doors to allow some of the ships to be able to leave. He took down some Rathars. There was this great moment where he was lifting the doors up, and then Chancey Yarrow and Nan are trying to repair the positional thrusters. They had killed the other Nile that were on board. And Chancey Yarrow is the one person that's going to save this ship. And he just assumes, oh, Nile people are here. They're messing with the thrusters. And he just cuts her down, slices her down in cold blood without even a second thought. He didn't even ask. And in that one instance, he is just completely shattered, just completely broken. And I loved how we saw the death of Chancey Yarrow. And it's not like there was like, it just very much point of blank. I wrote it down, but it was like 324. He basically just comes in and talks about how he just sliced her down and
Bisected her.
it's tall. Yeah, it's bisected. It's talking through Nan's point of view. She says the Jedi's, and
Oh,
it's talking about like the Jedi's face turned white as he realized what he'd done. And so we don't even get to hear necessarily like Elzar's initial thoughts. We have to wait, a couple pages before that. But anyway, just fascinating the way that Orla is his like beacon of, he keeps repeating things that she's told him in his head, and she's gone, and she's not there to maybe guide him or be there with him on that final journey, and it ends up in the catastrophe of the station. He's going to feel partially responsible for the death of Stellan moving forward.
yeah. They kind of have complete opposite trajectories out of this book, where Stellan's finds who he really is at the very end, and he then sacrifices himself for the greater good.
Mhm.
Whereas Elzar is trying to accomplish the same thing with the positional thrusters, but he completely loses who he is
Mhm.
by attacking Chancey Yarrow. Um, the next, the start of phase 3, whenever you do get something about Elzar or he's involved, he is a complete wreck.
Mhm.
Not to go into phase 3 talking points, but like I think that's even apparent in this book. His face goes
Mhm.
white. Nan is there and adding insult to injury. If
Right.
you've read and if you've watched our video on Into the Dark, she's a great foil for the young adult
Yes.
grade of books. And so for her to be pulled up and used pretty well in this adult novel, I thought was a pretty good job. Um, but yeah, she's just trying to leave. She's not even trying to save the station at that point. She knows she's not going to be able to do that on her own. Chancey
Yeah.
was the only one going to be able to do that. So she's going to leave, but before she
She just
leaves and
takes
finds
off.
her
Yeah.
own ship, she's gonna tell Elzar like, "You're an idiot. You have killed everyone on this station. You ruined everything. You're the worst person ever." And Elzar is in the worst mental possible point right now, so he's gonna believe
Mhm,
that. Like
mhm.
it's a 17-year-old girl telling him these things, but he feels those things, and she's reinforcing that. And so, coming out of this book, when he lands on Iram, he he finds Avar,
He's broken,
and
essentially.
he's broken. He has to be the one to tell her. No, they don't know. They're not sure where he is because, like, oh yeah, he should have been on the last one out. JJ 5145 rolls up and has to be the one to say, Master Stellan wanted you to have this. Opens his compartment and it's Stellan's saber, and they both break down.
Mhm.
And that's officially when they find out, like, oh, I failed by running away from Starlight to go try to catch Lorna D, and I failed by acting in rage. I saw Nile and I completely lost it. So they're completely undone by the end of this book. All the stuff that they've tried to go through during it and during all of phase one.
And the thing about like Elzar's story too is that it's so inextricably linked with Avar, and we don't get Avar hardly at all in this book because they really, the three of them don't interact. And sorry, I was looking for the page number too. I was trying to find the page number where it like happens that I was thinking of, but there's a scene in the book that really kind of encapsulates that relationship. And I'm such a romantic too, and I love the two of their relation. I swear, if we can get into that later in the timeline. Those spoilers. But it's for other things. But Elzar lives. He's reunited. You mentioned that scene where he's reunited with Avar at the end, and how they didn't know for sure if either of them were alive. But there's the moment where Elzar is trying to use the Force. He's calling on the Force for the first time, really letting it in, and he needs help. And Elzar senses the Force as an ocean. Like we have that
Oh
image
yeah.
here. If he senses the Force as an ocean, and Orla has been telling him, "You cannot control the ocean. You're trying to control the ocean. Flow with the ocean. Be one with the waves. Go with the current." And that's what he is, kind of learning. Avar sees the Force, as a song and the melody of the Force, and
Oh,
she feels like Elzar's presence is a singular note in that song of the Force. Stellan has a singular note in the Force that she's familiar with, and there's that moment where he is like trying to like lift the door. He's trying to gather upon himself enough strength in the Force, and he hears, just barely feels the connection. He knows that Avar's alive, and he hears the song of the Force, which is her ability to bring people together. And then it goes over to Avar, who's on Iram, and she's levitating, trying to connect as many Jedi as she can. She's trying to be as uplifting as she can using the Force. And there's that little line of, and deep within the song of the Force, she felt the waves of the ocean, so to
yeah.
speak. And that's when you're just like, oh, this is, oh, they're so
So
connected. Like I
good.
love them so much. Like I need them to be together right now. But really though, so much of Elzar is he's trying to help make sure he doesn't fall short of what other people, believe in him, and he doesn't want to upset them, but he loses sight of himself. And you mentioned like he's torn apart here when he slices her down, and that's something that's going to stay with him for the rest of his life, and something he's really going to have to overcome as we get into phase 3.
Totally. Her death, Chancey Yarrow. I don't know that we can go super in depth on her because she was an interesting mom to Sylvester Yarrow. And gotta say, the first time reading this through, I had only read the first two adult novels. So like there's a good
Mhm.
handful of references to Chancey missing Sylvester. Chancey wishes that it was Sylvester at her side and not Nan.
Mhm.
Maybe just tries to make Nan into what her daughter could be, and that was completely lost on me first time through. But having read the
Right.
extra
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
material, it was really impactful to actually read, to know who Sylvester is, and I have my own relationship with like who that character is, and now for Chancey to have kind of, I mean, she was trying to save the station. she wasn't trying to like blow it up or anything like the
She's
other
trying to save herself,
horrible.
you
Yeah,
know,
she was trying to.
essentially.
It wasn't a noble act; it was a selfish
Right.
act, but it would have,
Mhm.
in turn,
Self-preservation,
helped
which would
some
have had
people.
positive. I mean, she literally has a line where it says, Nan says, "You'll save the station, but like, you're also going to save all the Jedi and Republic officers on board." And she said something, "Not every plan is perfect."
Yeah, yeah. So her death, moving forward, is going to affect Silvestri
Mhm.
in some great ways. Gosh, who else do we even have?
Well,
Mid
of course.
and
Well, even
Bell.
before you get into like you mentioned being able to digest Chansey and Silvestri's relationship a little bit more here, and how Chansey was trying to do that with Nan a little bit. So I think my second read through, I kind of appreciated more of the vessel cruise arc, along with
Oh
what
yeah,
happens with Nan and Silvestri in ways I didn't before, because your focus is so much on the Jedi, and I frankly, I even the second time though, I wish there was more with the Jedi instead of some of these other characters. Like those are just the ones I was most
Cody
fascinated
Lynn.
by. But we talked about Elzar and Stellan being on different wavelengths again. I just want to hit on one last thing. It's like one of the last things that happens is when Elzar and Stellan, about 2/3 through the book, as we get through the final parts, is when Elzar leads Stellan through that joint like meditation practice that Orla taught him, and he's now teaching Stellan. And it was saying here that Stellan had been slowly closing himself off and putting up walls around all his friends, that Elzar hadn't even realized that his friend was gone. He's like, my friend's back with me now, and I didn't even realize it. And he's been kind of pushing off. And Stellan opens up to Elzar that he was always jealous of him and Avar's relationship, not out of jealousy of like he wanted to be with one of them, but that they had like a level of intimacy and they were closer than he could be. And talks about how, they're, a constellation, they're 3 stars in the sky, but 2 of those stars were always much closer than the third. And for Elzar to say that, yes, but like you were the star that guided us. You were the one you were our pole star, the one that showed us the way of how to be a great Jedi and what to do, that I felt like I could never be. And Stellan got to be that. And so to have now the title at that moment, it was when you knew Stellan was probably going to die, when it's like they start calling him the pole star. You're like, the book's called The Fallen Star. That's where it really starts, getting a little bit too serious, maybe.
And then, I mean, his name is a reference to that too, like Stellan, Stellar. That's just like part of the whole thing too. So, yeah, that was such a good scene where these two men were finally like emotionally intimate with each other. And that, I feel like that word oftentimes in our current day gets thrown around as something that's like romantic, but intimacy is just something you can be with anybody ever. Like that's what a good friendship should have, is intimacy. And so to see these two guys have an actual deep friendship, super deep, that they can be like vulnerable with each other. I need more of that. I need to see more men being more emotionally available.
Right.
And ultimately, like, it did help them out. Like they were able to. That was like probably the height of both of them in the book. Maybe is
Yeah.
kind of pulling Stellan back up from the depths. That's where he kind of starts going back up, and Elzar's really at his height because he's leading that. He learned that from Orla. He's able to be in such a good position where he can lead that now, where it's usually been Stellan being the pole star. Like he's kind of able to step into that. Like, well, if no one else is going to step up, like I can do it, and that's
It's got to be me.
oddly partly because he's closing himself off from the Force more than normal Jedi do in general, because he's also the least affected by the Nameless because
Because
he's
he's been
not opening
closing
himself
himself off.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
it's
good
kind
point.
of crazy.
And
Kind of
the
cool.
last thing we get with Elzar is he thinks about Stellan. And so when Stellan, they get together, and all the Jedi that survive or had arrived on Iram, they basically work. Iram's been facing this, water shortage, and so they get together to fix this giant water plant, essentially, and they use the Force to move it, like in this massive. And everyone's like awestruck, and it was this way of showing the galaxy in a sense, like we can still fight back, like everything, there's always hope. And Elzar did say, like, you would be proud of this, he thought, imagining Stellan's face, Even without Starlight, the Jedi have so much to give the galaxy. I will learn how to give the best of myself, how to constrain the worst part of myself. My actions deprived the galaxy of one of its greatest Jedi. For the rest of my life, I will be trying to create some small fraction of the goodness that he still had to give. And that speaks both to the beauty of Elzar's character, but also his fatal flaw, in a sense, right here, where he's yes, there is a large level of responsibility that he feels, but now he moves forward thinking like I have to be Stellan, and he can never be Stellan. And
Yeah.
that's good that he can never be. He needs to be Elzar and find
Yeah.
the best way to be. He talks about constraining himself and the best and giving back to the good, but we see that he takes that in the later books and he says, "I need," and he tries to become, Stellan in ways that he can't fill those shoes, and he's gonna have to learn how to fill his own, shoes that he needs to, chart forward for the Order.
Yeah. Um, wow, is that going to be a huge point for Eye of Darkness? Um, yeah, I mean that's he's always kind of looking for a role to fill, and you just need to be yourself, man. That's all we're asking for. That's what he had to learn on Let Allow is
Mhm.
handstand in the waves. And it's like, oh, I can't stand, I can't breathe. And it's like you need to learn to like go with the flow. You're trying too hard to go against your nature, really. You need to
Mhm.
learn what your nature is.
That Elzar's like so good. I love Elzar so
I love
much.
Elzar.
So now let's talk about Bell. Okay, Bell Zettifar, one of our favorites. I know we both love Bell, and let's talk about Buryaga as well. So the two of them, pretty much, you can go hand in hand. Like these two are becoming the best of friends in a very short amount of time, bonded together. And Burry loses his master in this, and Bell has experienced that once, almost twice, when his new master Indira almost dies as well. And the two of them are bonded both by that, but Burry is such an empathetic Jedi and he feels emotions. And what I always loved about them is Bell has gone through such torment, in his short time that we've gotten to know him. And Burry's someone that feels, but he can also comfort in great ways. And I think they really learn from each other and they play off each other really well. And for Bell now to be the one that's there for Burry is so fascinating. And then Burry, of course, is believed to be dead, sacrificing himself so Elzar could, help save many people on the station. Of course, spoilers, like Burry is alive, but they announced that pretty quickly. Like it wasn't long after this book came out that they were like, yeah, Burry's alive, like a few months really. And
Yeah.
but Bell is about I am not going to believe that Burry's dead till I see a body, essentially, because he believed that about Master Loden when he didn't feel Loden gone necessarily. And he's like, I'm not going to give up again. If anyone could find a way to survive, it would be Burry. And then we're going to get this beautiful story that we're going to get to very soon in the timeline show about Burry, or Bell going on this journey that ultimately saves Burry's life. And these two just have such a wholesome friendship. And what I love is that we get a lot of this from Bell's perspective. And so later on, when we get to some of the other stories, like Temptation of the Force, for example, where we get more of Buryaga's perspective, which is unique. But Bell is just he's finding his confidence again, and he has lost so many masters and he feels alone, he feels helpless at times, and we get him kind of coming into his own and becoming the Jedi Knight that we know he already pretty much is, but needs to believe that for himself.
Totally. These two characters are perfect for each other. Just absolutely perfect for each other. Um, they have like this twofold thing where like you've already mentioned, they both have now lost their original masters to
Mhm.
the Nile in some type of way, whether it be well, it's actually they do both get lost to the Nameless.
Right.
But Buryaga needs um confidence really. He's so empathetic and so in touch with his feelings. He's so able to help other people through this great ability. But he doesn't really have like a strong personality to like go get him like confidence is kind of I guess how I would sum that up. But Bell, because Loden is the perfect character ever, has gifted Bell with like a good, strong like sense of confidence and sense of like go get him. Like I'm gonna dive into this head first. Um, the way that they like are like two halves of one whole, I think, is
Mhm.
really beautiful. Especially in this book, they actually come together and really form their tight bond, their friendship, and we will see all throughout phase three. Their relationship is really cool.
Mhm.
They're such good friends that it really starts here in this book. They spend a lot of time in the med bay because Indira Stokes is almost taken out by a nameless, but she somehow survives. She wasn't too close to it. Um, so Belle the whole time is worrying that he's gonna lose
Mhm.
her. And so Buryaga is an amazing companion to comfort him through that. He gets to have that returned from Belle then when Nibisek dies. They are the ones that actually find her body, which is horrifying and
Or what's
super traumatizing
what's
for them.
left
It's
of it.
not, yeah, not that they just hear the news, they find Nib. So
Exactly.
they go
So
through
one oh,
hell.
sorry.
They go through hell and they're there for each other, and that's how they get through it, really.
They're just like I think two halves that make the whole. Like you know what I mean? What you said was brilliant because they are one of the best friendships in Star Wars, really. If you take the time to read the books and you're familiar with books and like all the other friendships in Star Wars, theirs is just one of the most pure uh, buddy duos in all of Star Wars. Like speaking of the opposite of that, though, we have to go into the villain side of things now. So this is like our last power player we're going to discuss before I want to
Yeah.
get into like some of the ancillary characters that we got to know a little bit better in this, and then a couple gripes that I had though. Martian Rowe, I mean, brilliantly deploys the Nile in all of the little temples and places around Starlight to eliminate all help coming, but making it seem like this is like a last desperate, feeble attack on the Jedi, when in reality, they're like, we're going to cut off all support that you could get in time for the timeline of when Starlight would fall, because he could have easily had said, just blow up Starlight instantly. Just do it. Like, we're going to do something that just takes it out and incinerates it. But he wanted a slow death because he wanted the entire galaxy to watch this unfold. And we get little scenes of that from Lena So talking about how she's watching people holding each other, crying, watching the HoloNet. And there is a level of just really sadistic behavior that he wants the whole world, the whole galaxy to watch his ultimate victory, essentially. And as someone who loves a good villain, I love a good villain, but even I just, you hate Markian Rowe, great villain, but like you just hate Markian Rowe. Like this guy is just pure evil from the standpoint of he has no intentions of ruling the Outer Rim. He has no intentions of governing. It's like when Palpatine, for instance, was, he takes over. He wants ultimate authority to rule. Markian Rowe doesn't want to rule. He just wants to destroy. He wants to conquer and then leave and just leave whatever happens in his wake he doesn't care, and he's willing to use whoever he has to get it. Like he has this sexual relationship with Gira Staros, try manipulating her a little bit in order to get what he wants from the Galactic Senate. And she foolishly believes that, he's able to be manipulated to do something for the greater good of the galaxy. Like in terms of, she feels like he's going to play this role, he's going to win in some degree. And she's like, I can be on both sides of this and come out on top, when there is no negotiating with Mark Rowe. There is no manipulating him to do something on behalf of the greater good of whatever people that he's with, because he has no interest in governing and sitting and ruling. He just wants to conquer and destroy. And she's foolishly going to fall in line with that. And so we see a little bit of that relationship unfold. But I mean, he's laughing and applauding, and he wants as much destruction as possible. And the loyalty he's instilled in some of the followers, to where the people that he sent on the mission, he doesn't care about them at all. But they were like, we're going on the suicide run to die for the Eye of the Nile, out of such loyalty that they didn't even think a second thought for their own lives.
Not at all. They willingly signed up knowing that this was probably going to be a one-way trip. They said goodbye to their families from the Gaze Electric. They were one of the
Mhm,
only people that had ever really set foot on that in the past couple
mhm.
100 years. So, yeah, he has these fanatical followers that will do whatever he tells them to do. And he takes full advantage of that. He has cultivated that so that people will do that for him. Just total sadistic behavior. And for him to, he can be very meticulous with his planning and very
Oh, he's
well
very,
planned
very well planned.
um, to destroy those planets in a very specific way so that help can't get to
Mhm.
the fallen star,
And we're gonna see that in future books how when he doesn't have a very clear target
it's
to go and
crazy
destroy,
how,
he struggles and he gets
yeah,
bored and he just wants to find the next thing and how that's gonna play a role in what we're gonna see moving forward, which in Trials of the Jedi, I'm excited to. I mean, Charles Soule is the guy for the Eye of the Nile, so I'm excited to see exactly his point. I want to know the POV for Martian in that book for sure. But yeah, totally, totally evil. You mentioned something before about you loved getting to know some of the like side characters more in this and being able to focus a little bit more. And the crew of the vessel would probably fit that the most, as you have Leox Yasi, Affy Hollow, and then of course Geode, the Vintian Navigator. Gotta love Geode. He saved everyone's lives a couple of times in this one. And the part where he kills Cody Lim by choosing to magnetically seal himself in order to have the blaster bolt bounce off of him was fantastic. Something new in this. So in Into the Dark and the other like stories where we had the vessel before, and like in these comics, a lot of times we get more of Affy's perspective and we get more of her taking charge. We got a ton of Leox in this and got to know a little bit more about how his brain works and how he's wired. And I appreciated kind of having a little bit more of his perspective because it rounds out the vessel crew. And I don't think I appreciated that as much the first time I read through this.
that's fair. I think Claudia did a pretty good job knowing that this crew of three works really well wherever you put them as far as like adult, young adult, whatever. Because for the young adult, where they're mainly showing up, is like Affy is that age, so the story is going to happen through her eyes a
Mhm.
lot. And so for this to be an adult novel, she transitioned that pretty well to being Leox, being the one whose eyes we get to see through for the vessel crew. And
Correct.
we've talked about it before. Like he's so interesting with his like hippie surfer type of
I mean, just look at this guy.
personality. Just that is exactly how he is. Like that perfectly embodies it.
He just looks way
Um,
younger, and I always picture him as like this older geezer in here, and he just looks
yeah,
like a young hot hipster in this. Like
yeah.
he's like looks like I
His
mean,
ripped
he looks
abs.
like he's got like ripped abs and he's jacked, and it's like some. I'm like, that's not the kind of person that I envision when I read him. Even though it's like he's described in these ways, but I just the way he talks, how he interacts, I just don't ever picture that whenever I think about it.
He's very go with the flow, very like let
Right.
the universe do what it wants, and we'll just ride along. And
Well, ride the wave, brother.
yeah, yeah. So he gets his heroic moment. I mean, this is like his most important novel, kind of
Mhm.
like
It really is.
the bay doors won't open. They're supposed to open. It's getting down to like these either need to open right now or everyone in here dies.
Mhm.
And he sacrifices himself, goes on the outside with like magnetic clamps to
Mhm.
physically turn the dial to get this door to open. So everybody gets to escape. Affy gets to keep the vessel, which was a really big point of contention. Like, does she want to, abandon this ship? It's really her home. She doesn't live on a planet. This is where she lives. So for her to decide, they as a crew have decided like, after you're gonna take it, it's yours. I'm gonna go do this. Like, I love you. Have a great life. Take care
Mhm.
of Geode. And then they get out. Affy's mourning, like, oh, Geode, like, I can't believe he saved everyone. He saved us. Like, we'll never forget him. And he like glides down on his like
How's it going,
paraglider
little bit?
parachute. A little bit.
Little bit. Good to see you, little bit.
And he's known for doing things the old-fashioned way. He's always got toolkits that he's working on, or other people are using like computers and technology. He's like, I'm gonna grab a wrench. I'm gonna do this
You know,
myself.
You know who I would have loved to see interact in some alternate universe? Quill and Leox.
Oh,
Just he's like, you'll be surprised by what one can do with one's own hands. And Leox like, that sounds pretty good to me, partner. Like, just
I have
absolutely
spoken.
love that little thing. I have spoken. It appears you have, sir. Like, it's the vibes between the two of them would be funny, but they're very similar in terms of, like, I think some of their philosophies, but just their way they go about saying it is obviously unique. But I would love to
Totally.
watch them interact in another ways, in another timeline. But
I would too.
I do love what you said about Leox. Like he does make that sacrifice, and yeah, I did appreciate the vessel crew. Something though, I just wish I had gotten a little bit more of Stellan and Elzar's, like just interacting a little bit more, and watching some of these Jedi go a little bit deeper. I think Claudia spends a little bit too much time indulging the vessel side of things. We know she loves her geode and her vessel crew, and so I never want to tell an author like what they're supposed to do. I'm not trying to say that. I just think that the pacing of this book was marred a little bit sometimes through, for instance, like Coley Lynn. The whole Coley Lynn storyline didn't
Yeah.
even need to happen. It does not really play a role in the book at all, other than taking away time from the character we really want to be spending with. Like, because it ultimately just ends with Geo killing him with a blaster bolt, and then Chansey and Nan just go off and do their own thing. Like everything that he was trying to organize, like to lead a revolt against the Jedi on the station to get out their own way, doesn't really come to fruition in any sort of meaningful way whatsoever. So it's like all these pages that we spent with him causing problems or having these conversations could have been spent either, hey, like further developing, sure, like more Chansey Nan, but we could have had more time with Stellan, could have been more time with Elzar. We could have sprinkled in some more Avar into like the communication. Like I feel like there's other characters that were a little bit were a little disservice to. Like maybe Indira and Nib like have a little bit more interactions with their Padwans, and I don't know. There's just characters that have higher stakes that mean more to the story that maybe were slightly shortchanged in favor of having some of these pages go elsewhere. And if you eliminate those altogether and you don't add anything else, like the pacing, I think, works a lot better as well.
I think so too. The High Republic is so Jedi and Force oriented that I'm always kind of wanting more. Even though that's like the main thing we do get. Sometimes when we do get the even the vessel, who I really like, the vessel crew, sometimes I'm like, oh, but I want a little bit more like Wreath in this book, or I want a little bit more. Definitely for this book, choosing more Elzar and Stellan, that's perfect, because the little bit that we did get, the amount that we did get, I'm not gonna say it was a little, but the amount that we did get was good. And so that makes me want even more. I feel like we deserved more of their like friendship rekindling and stuff.
It's a little weird, right? That we have the Rising Storm where Chancellor Lena So is such a prominent figure, and in the Fallen and in Light of the Jedi, she's such a prominent, figure, and in the Fallen Star, she has like 2 pages that she appears in and doesn't really say much at all. It's just kind of like a quick flash over to which she's not a prevalent point in the story, but how the government and how the Republic is responding to Starlight Beacon is something as they learn about this slowly coming in these, because this is hours. Like I would have liked to maybe have dedicated some time to Lena So, who, if you're reading this in continuation, you're like, well, I thought this was like, she's so important. Like, what is she saying? Like, we spent more time with Gira Staros than Lena So here. Like, that doesn't make sense to me personally. And that's some of my issues with the Fallen Star. I feel like, yes, it's the existential dread of what's to come, but sometimes not enough meaningful things happen in those quieter moments to fill that space of the dread where I know what's going to happen. I feel it, but I want the tension and the characters I'm feeling. Like exploring that with Coley Lynn doesn't really do it for me. I'm sorry. Like, or even Chansey and Nan, I've never really connected with them per se as characters. Maybe finding a different way to incorporate Nan would have been my preferred. Obviously, you have the whole Chansey Nan stuff that goes back to the last book. But I've told you for a while, I kind of wish that Nan had just stayed the course with Anile. And what if she had been on that, mission with the others to sabotage Starlight Beacon and be a part of that, and realizing that she doesn't want to give up her place for the Nile because, later on the timeline, we know that Crisis of Fate doesn't necessarily just go away anytime soon. So I don't know. But this is the book that we have, and I will love it. And it does belong on your Star Wars shelf. I do appreciate that if you were not reading any other book, you just picked up Fallen Star, you would understand the importance of all these characters and the importance of Starlight Beacon and the evil nature of Marking Like all of that. You could read this as a standalone book, honestly, and come away with a lot of questions, of course, but you
Yeah.
can read it without reading anything else. And I think it actually stands the test of time a little bit versus The Rising Storm. I don't think does that as well. I think it is very much a clear sequel to the Light of the Jedi. I'm not suggesting someone go read The Fallen Star without reading the others, but I actually think it does pretty well on its own.
Yeah. As far as like being number 2 and number 3 in the series, obviously the Light of the Jedi is going to be eternally like rereadable because there is nothing that you have to do before that. You can just jump into that. But I do think this one works better. Like if you're just going to pick this one up, you don't feel like you're missing a ton of lore, whereas a lot of the Rising Storm, you're diving into Markian Row, and it's like, oh, he's going to the Carvashark ruins on Rystan, and it's like, what is happening here? And this one, you kind of just get like, he's working from no space. He's
Right.
sending these people out. Like it's pretty clear what's happening, and it's a good amount of clear. I think it works as a standalone. You're gonna come away with questions like, how did we get to here? How did we get to this point? But you pick that up as you go. Like I think Claudia does a pretty good job of retelling things that maybe happened in previous books in a couple sentences. Gives you the context you need, because I mean that's kind of how all of the books work, honestly. Like at this, I'm expecting like we're gonna pick up Trials of the Jedi, the last book, here in the mid-June. And you know, Charles is still gonna have to kind of give you a little bit of points that you've already read before, but like
Right.
he wants people to buy his book. And if you only are like a Charles Soule person, you maybe haven't read the other book. So you gotta like do a little work. Claudia did a little work for us, so it's fine.
Well, Luke, an hour of The Fallen Star, and I have to tell you, I'm just in love with the timeline show. I just love doing this show with you. My favorite. I'm so glad that we're back, and hopefully we can stay a little bit more on track. You know, it's hard when we get into seasons where it's like when we have Young Jedi Adventures or a show. It's so much easier to do the shows or the comics because you can go through the comics. But when we have like the thick 400-page novels, sometimes it can take a little longer, especially for me because I'm like, I'm going to reread and dissect this whole thing.
Oh yeah.
Like I feel like I need to, and then
It deserves that.
Then we read at different spots. So you finish before me, or I finish before you, and then it's like, all right, we got to sync up our knowledge and our timelines. Pun intended. So next book, Midnight Horizon 230 BBY. This one's going to take place kind of simultaneously with The Fallen Star, but we're going to be more with Comac Vitus, Reese Silas. We'll have most of our comic crew that we've been following for a while. We get some, we get some Lula. We get a lot of Zine in the next book, a lot of Zine, which I'm excited for. And so we'll get into those characters, and they're going to be on Corellia. It's the like a big mystery kind of with this epic battle at the end with one of my favorite Yoda moments in all of Star Wars. Like it's Star Wars, freaking good. So I can't wait to get into that one. I am going to start reading it tonight. Hopefully by next weekend we'll be good to go, but we'll see. But Luke, any other final comments on Timeline Show Fallen Star before we get out of here?
Gosh, it was a ton of fun to get back into it after a little bit off. I think I almost maybe needed that time off to kind of like reset. So I hope you're not too upset, viewers, but we're back, baby. And we're going to be crushing it for a while. I'm going to restructure the way we do comics a little bit because I have found they're kind of intentionally released in these trade paperbacks that make a little bit more sense than the way that I was kind of arbitrarily splitting them up. But shouldn't be a huge change. So if anything, it'll make more sense to people who read comics, actually. So
excellent. By the time we do the next Timeline Show, I may or may not be in the same place. I might be in my new apartment. So, which see what that looks like I told I told Janelle, she was like, you have so many Star Wars books and toys and things. Are we like, I don't think you can keep everything. And I said, oh, I'm keeping it all. She goes, everything? I'm like, everything.
Everything. What do I
For light and
sacrifice?
life. For light and life, everyone. Remember that we are all the Republic.